Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Catherine, that's Paul, and that was a really interesting race.
It was not what I expected, and it actually got exciting in the last 7 laps when everybody thought we were just going to watch, another DRS train go by.
Yeah, I mean, definitely didn't live up to the 2024 Canadian Grand Prix, which, as I mentioned in our predictions episode, I fully did not remember. And then when I looked into it, I was like, oh, it was one of the most exciting races of the 2024 season that I had forgotten. So, oops. But yeah, this was not nearly as exciting as that one, though we did get a little sprinkling thanks to Lando having a Lando moment.
Yes, that was very good, and let's call it for what it is. Last year's weather actually played a big role in the excitement of the 2024 race.
Oh, I mean, it was significant. But anyway, we will talk about the race. Before we do, we have a couple of tiny bits of news. One is a very nice piece of interesting news related to the weekend, and another is actually probably going to have a lot of interesting implications going down through the next couple of years in, the landscape of Formula 1 teams. So, first and foremost, Ferrari and more importantly, former Formula 1 driver Robert Kubica won Le Mans.
Which is a fantastic achievement. 24 Hours of Le Mans is an iconic race. And kudos to Robert and his team and Ferrari for doing so well.
Obviously, we know that Kubica, his racing career was pretty derailed. He was rallying prior to what was he was supposed to join Ferrari for the 2011 or 2012 season, but his racing career almost ended in 2011 at the Andorra Rally because of a very bad crash that A, he almost lost his life in, but B, led to the partial amputation of his forearm, among other major injuries. But he actually did manage to come back and managed to come back not just as like a test and reserve driver for Formula One, but he actually did race the 2019 season. And guess who his teammate was that year?
2019 season. Hmm. George Russell.
It was George Russell. They raced together that back when George was farmed out to the training team for his rookie year, and it was George and Kubica racing together, which I just the fact that they both won at Le Mans and Canada today, it was a good day for the former teammates.
Good symmetry for the former teammates. I agree.
Yeah.
I
And
agree.
then the other big piece of news that I saw after the race is it was just announced that the CEO of Renault is stepping down at the end of this month to try to save the Gucci brand. So good luck to him, but also this is going to mean a lot of really interesting things for the future of Alpine.
I agree, and I am wondering if Luca was Flavio's champion, if you will, in the boardroom, and will his decisions now fall upon some other ears that may not necessarily agree with Flavio's decisions?
Yeah, so Luca de Meo, who he's been basically the architect of what we know now as the Alpine Formula One project. He's also been the person who's kind of been spearheading this project throughout some really interesting turmoil. Obviously, they have gone through team principles worse than Ferrari does, and we talked in our F1 genealogy project in the Ferrari episode about how they go through team principles like candy. But if you think it's been 5 years since De Meo showed up, and they've had one, two, three, four, five, six team principals, not including Flavio Briatore as team principal in name until they actually announce a real team principal at some point soon, or I think it's their racing director, whoever it is now, who's the team principal. So that's so many team principals in only 5 years. And like you said, Flavio Briatore was really brought on to advise the CEO, and the CEO is leaving after doing some interesting things like green lighting the abolition of the F1 engine program and leading to them becoming a Mercedes customer teams in the next season.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, it just feels like Alpine has changed principles, team principles, like we all change clothes, and
Mm-hmm.
we how do you create a culture when the guy that's supposed to be or the person I should say that's supposed to be at the top is so fearful of his job, year in and year out in Austria, so
Spa.
Spa, yes, thank you. It's Spa, Belgium. Thank you. But
Yeah.
I just it doesn't quite make sense to me. But then again, I don't think that anything Flavio has done this season has made any sense either.
Well, no, I mean, Alpine has been pretty. Instead of Alpine being, noticeably bad, they're now just noticeably irrelevant because like Gasly and Colapinto didn't do jack today, and I think there have been rumblings that Colapinto hasn't come in with the same impact that Briatore expected, and will Colapinto last a few more races before Flavio Briatore calls up Mick Schumacher, who just finished his little stint at Le Mans as well? Or is he going to stick with Colapinto? We don't know yet. But it really feels just with getting rid of the engine program, having the CEO who's brought them to this point where they're really in flux and kind of a hot garbage fire, like it is widely felt by a number of people that this could just be part and parcel of making the team easier to sell, even though De Meo and Briatore have both denied this. But of course, they're going to deny it. They're not be like, oh, yeah, this is totally the plan is to sell the team, because that's going to uproot hundreds, if not thousands of lives. So obviously, they're not going to just say, this is what we're secretly planning.
Well, and I agree with you, but there was actually an instance. I want to say 2/3 into the race where there were pit wall instructions for Gasly and Colapinto to switch places,
Yes.
and what I didn't understand was why. Because I don't think that Colapinto had any more pace than Gasly to get up into the higher positions, much less into the points. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest here. I wasn't paying all that close attention to what Alpine was doing just because we had other things to think about during the race. But Gasly finished 15th, Colapinto finished 13th. Colapinto also outqualified Gasly. So it could have been a matter of they were just on opposite strategies and they decided they needed to switch them just to keep them on those opposite strategies. But I think in general, it wasn't like Flavio saying we need to put my golden boy, who I just put in the car, ahead of Gasly for any reason. I just think it was probably an alternate strategy question that just obviously it didn't matter because they didn't do anything.
yeah, and my conspiracy theory mind was one who said, "Oh, he's trying to have him switch places so that he can self sabotage." I
Probably not today, but that
or
that
or or to give Flavio the excuse to go to Mick or one of the other 800 different reserve
reserve
drivers
driver.
in Alpine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Flavio needs that much of a reason. Like he could wake up and feel in such a way one day and be like, I want to go with Mick or I want to go with Paul Aaron or whatever. But I think there is probably more than a little bit of credence to the idea of preparing Alpine to sell. They already have moved away from the traditional Renault brand that has been such a long-standing brand through Formula One for so many years. They're getting rid of the engine program because, it's bad. And so the writing is definitely on the wall. Otmar Safnauer, who is one of the former Alpine team principals who got fired at Spa, he is actually working on a project to get a 12th team into Formula One right now. So this could potentially be an option of, they might just it could give them an opportunity to come on by way of taking over from Alpine and, the ashes of Alpine, which would also be a really funny full circle of like the revenge of the Otmar.
That would be great. And I happen to be an Otmar fan. I liked when he was on Sky Sports, that when he was doing his commentary during the race and
Right.
during free practices. I just liked his matter of factness. I mean, he and James Vowles are a very similar type,
Yeah.
which is great. I would stay tuned for summer break because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely nothing we're gonna get like an immediate news on. I read it in an article talking about the CEO stepping down, that Renault has already said that there is a succession plan in place for De Meo's successor, so that might be they're going to maintain some stability by keeping someone internal as their new hire. But I still think that the writing is on the wall for some big changes in the future with Alpine on a much shorter term than it would have been if it was just us going into next year and the new regulation having them shift to being a customer team and getting rid of these really bad Renault engines.
Watch for a vote of confidence from someone in Renault that really says to you, we're getting rid of everybody and we're going to sell the place.
Yeah, so we'll see. And obviously, that would be really unfortunate for all of the people within the organization who are going to, could potentially lose their jobs, especially if Alpine is bought out by someone who moves. Because I feel like every team is basically moving their bases to the UK, and they are based in France. So that would be a big thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
So let's get back to the Canadian Grand Prix.
Yes. And shock of all shocks, but also honestly not. And I don't think we need to spend a lot of time talking about this because this really wasn't like the biggest of all impacts for the race. But George and Max acted like adults for once and did not have a dramatic clash going into the opening lap like everyone thought that they would after qualifying. George led from the front, and that's basically all he did. Max had some fun moments. He got close when George was fighting through traffic, and they were both fighting through traffic. And they kind of finished exactly where they were expected to.
I agree. I think George had George's start, which was 6/100ths of a second better than Max's, was the telltale sign, and it just went on from there. And tire strategy was an issue, but hey, this is the way these things work. I mean, it's for those of us who happen to like Max, and I know that you like Max as much as I do, of course we'd like to see Max win all the time, but that's not what the sport is about. And this is it's good to have different people win, even if it is George, even if he does say some things after qualifying that he shouldn't say.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, like you would never have known that the last 2 weeks have been dominated by them going back and forth and, snarking at each other based on how they acted in the cool down room with Kimi Antonelli. And we'll talk about Kimi in a minute because that's like the biggest exciting part. But I will say, and as we are recording, we don't know what the results are, but Red Bull has submitted a protest to the results of the race based on what happened during the safety car period, where George braked really hard and Max had to inch his car ahead of George's to not crash into him. And so all of those radio calls at the end of the race of like, he overtook me, but no, he broke really hard. So Red Bull has lodged a protest as of what was it? They were all told to meet with the race stewards at 1750 local time. We have not yet seen any updates since. In all likelihood, I don't think that they're going to penalize George, even though he probably did overdo trying to keep his brakes warm, but I think that Red Bull was obliged to submit the protest because with the way that the cars were bunched up, if George gets any type of penalty, including just a 5-second penalty, that would make Max the winner. So obviously they're going to try.
Oh, I think the opportunity is definitely there. When I saw it, I felt like George had brake tested Max.
Yeah.
And you, everybody's got to play a game, and I'm sure they both knew that with 3 laps to go, they were going to end the race under a safety car,
which is always depressing.
Yeah, listen, Indy and NASCAR have tried to figure this out with a race stop and a race off, and it's actually caused more accidents than actual excitement.
Right.
So I don't begrudge this, the racing director for ending the race under under a safety car.
Yeah, I had seen some thoughts of like, why was it a safety car versus a red flag? And obviously the severity of the crash, I don't think what warranted a red flag in this situation. Like, obviously there was not a lot of time left in the race, but laps left are really not a consideration, I don't believe, for race stewards, race director, on how they should react to a late race crash. And that crash, caused some damage, which made the safety car have to take the cars through the pit lane. But it wasn't like it was in a bad spot where it was not safe for recovery crews to come get the cars. Like, for better or for worse, Lando crashed in a space that made it safe for recovery to get his car off the track. There just wasn't enough time to resume the race afterwards.
And it was decided that the safety car would run the pack through the pit lane. So that's another consideration. And every lap counts. Once the clock starts, every lap counts. So you can't make a position change. And yes, if you looked at the very last minute, the safety car goes off onto pit road, and George.
But the race doesn't resume until George crosses the safety car line.
Exactly. So it's we'd all like it to be exciting, but it's not always supposed to end that way.
Yeah, and I mean, we have had races happen. Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often where we have to end under safety car, and it's one of those things that you kind of have to live with some and just hope it doesn't happen again and know that it will happen at some point. But speaking of Lando's crash, and we'll get to the McLaren side of it, but before we do, Kimi Antonelli got his first podium as a Formula One driver.
Fantastic. The third youngest podium sitter of all time, behind Lance and Max.
I just think it's funny that Lance Stroll is the second youngest podium sitter in all of F1. Like, all of F1, you have Max Verstappen, fully expected because he came in when he was like 12 years old. Okay, he was 17. But then your other podium finisher is Lance Stroll.
But then again, with Lance at 18 years, 7 months, and 21 days, he may have peaked.
He might have, and I mean, he really hasn't done much since, so we don't know. But we do know that Kimi might owe Lando a little bit of a fruit basket, because Lando's clash with Oscar with his teammate helped Kimi, give Kimi some breathing room to keep his P3, which I don't know if I said it to you, but I was thinking the last 15 laps of the race, it's like, yes, Oscar, but also leave Kimi alone. Give him we wanted Kimi to get a podium.
No. You were absolutely saying that, and it was at that point where Oscar was P4, correct?
Yes.
So yeah, and Lando was P5, and everybody was trying to catch. And with tire degradation and with graining, it really became a lot more difficult. And as we will discuss in a little bit, McLaren did the dumb for the weekend.
They really did. And but it even for Kimi learned a lot from this race. He mentioned in the cool down room, which the cool down room, like, we just need like, I don't know, like a half hour of just like driver commentary on what happened during these drives. Like, let's get like the cool down room podcast. Let's make that a thing. But he mentioned that he kind of overdid it in that last stint of, trying to get after Max. So when Oscar got up to him, it was like, oh, it's going to be really difficult to defend from this. And he managed really well all the way up until he didn't need to worry about it because, Landoed.
Yeah, I'm thrilled for Kimi, and to here at this moment, I would like to do the shameless plug for The Seat on Netflix, where Catherine and Emily are featured prominently in the first 10 minutes of the documentary,
Yes.
saying that there was no way that Kimi was going to get hired for the second seat at Mercedes. But, how could being wrong have become so right?
It's great. Being wrong on the internet got me on a Netflix. How am I supposed to complain?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No.
So let's move on to the McLaren of it all, because I think I snarked at you because I tend to do that, and it's been pretty obvious that, like, I don't love McLaren, but I said to you at one point during the race, I said, McLaren is going to bleep themselves up. Let's go! Exclamation point! All caps. Do the stupid thing. And then 2 minutes later, I said, put each other into the wall of champions. And
Correct.
Then I said, McLaren, we don't have a number one driver. Also, McLaren, let's go ruin Oscar's day. And I think that was after Will Joseph, who is Lando's race engineer. I think that's after Will Joseph said to Lando, go after Oscar when he doesn't have DRS. And it's like, oh, so do they have a number one driver, or do they just want Lando to win the championship in any way possible?
But here's the question, though. If you saw where they were at, right before they entangled, both of them had their DRS open.
Yes.
Both
because they both had DRS because Oscar had DRS from Kimi.
Exactly. So they were both trying to use DRS and get back to, using them to get past. Now we've both seen how yes, you get an extra 12 kilometers an hour by using
depends
DRS,
on the track.
Depending on the track, obviously, but when you're both together getting the same amount of speed, how is that going to work out?
I mean, it honestly doesn't do anything, and that's why we have DRS trains, where when everyone has DRS, the effect of DRS gets completely negated. I think my favorite thing of all of that was in the cool down room when Kimi was like, I just didn't know who to give the slipstream to. Was it left or right? And George and Max were both like, so that's why you went into the middle. But it was nice of McLaren to give us something interesting. It was something fully expected that was inevitably going to happen between Oscar and Lando, just because of how close they are in the championship. Obviously, Oscar's lead has now been extended because Lando came out of the day with no points.
Right.
But credit to Lando. I know pigs are flying. Credit to Lando for he copped to the mistake, and it was a mistake. Obviously, he had no room. There was no gap, but I do think that this could be the beginning of more and more incidents like this between those two drivers, especially going through challenging weekends like McLaren has had. Because I texted you on Friday after the first practice, I was like, is McLaren sandbagging, or are they just bad in Canada? And the answer was yes.
Exactly. No. But I would also like to give kudos to Kimi. A couple of laps before the McLaren incident, Kimi actually defended extremely well against Oscar.
Yes.
When Oscar tried to make a move against Kimi and really created the space that he needed so that the rest of the events could take place as they did take place.
Right. He managed to maintain his position really well. And then Oscar fighting Lando, there was that moment where Lando was ahead when they were driving wheel to wheel for like a significant portion of that straight, even before Lando tried to find that gap again afterwards. But like that was some really exciting racing, considering how there was a lot of intrigue throughout the race, but like actual excitement, fun wheel to wheel action like that was a fun treat to see that done so cleanly all the way till it didn't go very well in the end.
Yes. It looked great until it wasn't.
Yeah, and I think we can also all just place all, yes, Lando took the blame, but we can place all of the blame on the Nico Rosberg curse, where Nico Rosberg comes in, takes a selfie, and then all of a sudden the selfie that he takes, either something bad happens to the garage, specifically the driver or the place on track, and he did take a selfie right where Lando crashed out, which also was like basically next to the McLaren pit wall.
Yes, exactly. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So moving on to who else impressed, Fernando Alonso, I think, had a really interesting race because he's finally qualifying where we expect him to qualify in a bad Aston Martin. And he was able to finish in the points again. This is the first back-to-back points finishes for Aston Martin since Lance Stroll did that in Australia and China, and managed to overcome a pretty bad first pit stop that sent him all the way to the back of the grid and somehow managed to get back into the points, which I fully didn't expect to happen. Wasn't paying attention to, considering everything else going on, until he was doing the rundown, was like, oh, he managed to recover, which is great, and also something that only, not many drivers would be able to accomplish.
Yeah, that was really good, and I think I had picked Fernando as P10. We'll talk about that later.
You did, yes.
But I thought that his chances are turning around, and there was also a moment as we talk about communications issues between drivers and pit wall, who's in charge and when should they be in charge.
Yeah.
Fernando had a comment that when the pit wall, and his engineers started to talk about braking, and he said, "We're racing, not testing." Yeah.
That was one of the great radio calls of the day. We all know that Charles had some zingers at his race engineer Brian, but it's fun when it's not just, the Ferraris making Ferrari comments and all that. So yeah, that was a great classic line from Fernando, and really just, shows that Fernando may not be at a great car, but he's still ready to race competitively.
Absolutely. And was looking to, he had a great start against Lewis because I think he started P7.
Yeah, I think they were near each other.
They were they were 5 and 6. They were 5 and 6.
So it was they were alongside each other to start.
So he had a great start, and look, even at his age, and I don't look at the hair. It's not that much of a problem. I think it's his competitive zeal is still there 110%.
Absolutely, and I think that he is definitely going to be happy to continue racing as long as he wants to, and I think that Aston Martin is still going to be happy to keep him, even though there are a lot of questions about potential. I mean, we've Emily and I have talked extensively about how like Yuki Tsunoda's future could very well be with Aston Martin, and with with Yuki's contract, Fernando's contract, Lance's seemingly unending contract, that could cause some very interesting wrinkles. And to speak on to Yuki itself, this was Yuki's 100th Formula One race, and unfortunately it was not his day.
No, it certainly was not. I mean, he started with a 10 place penalty, which put him in P18 because 2 other drivers had to replace power units, but ended up finishing P12. He had competed, in P11 for a while with a chance to get to P10, but never really got there.
Yeah, it's like, was it good to see him move through the field? Did they employ a good strategy? Yes. Is this where Red Bull needs him to be? No. And then to speak really quick on the drivers who started from the pit lane, one of them was Liam Lawson, who did very little today, but Liam Lawson started from the pit lane because they changed out his power unit, and then he had to retire the car to salvage the power unit. So that's really concerning.
That's a real significant issue there, and I know that you had Alex Albon who was trying to. I think that Alex was trying to do a one stop, and
Yeah, which
and
Carlos did do.
yes, he did, and it was, I mean, a very good strategy, but his power unit was a problem, and
Yeah,
that's the
Alex
power unit.
Williams just did not have a good weekend. Carlos somehow managed to salvage a terrible qualifying to finish in P10, which didn't see that coming. But yeah, it was not the weekend that Williams was expecting, especially with the trend that they had been on. And then in moments that made us sad, we heard a lot throughout the race of Lewis Hamilton had damage to his car, and we didn't know why or how or what happened. Martin Brundle was like, was there an impact somewhere? Did he take a hard curb? And it turns out that Lewis heard after the fact, and I don't know who he heard it from, but apparently the damage to the car was because he hit a groundhog.
Yeah, I mean that was really awful. I saw some of the pre-impact pictures and was surprised, and he was losing time because of that impact and the damage that it caused.
Yeah, I mean, not, but also like Lewis is like vegan, big into animals and all that. So like literally the last person on the grid who you'd want to see, like you don't want to see anybody hitting any one of the like mascots of certain Formula One circuits. Obviously we have the big lizards in Singapore, and we have the groundhogs here in Canada, and the swans that one time. But it's like, of all people, it's Lewis Hamilton who had to hit a groundhog. Poor guy.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Well, let's get to predictions so that we can get past predictions and
Yes,
move on to more
because
important.
predictions were bad.
Very bad.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
predictions, for poll, we Emily and I went with the typical sure pick of Oscar because going into the weekend we didn't think McLaren was going to be that bad. You went with Max, which was right all the way up until that final lap of the shootout. You were right there,
Missed
and
it
it was
by that
George.
much. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's gonna be you, and then all of a sudden George took pole, and I was like, God damn it. And then Podium completely lost it on the podium. I mean, you and I had Max on our podium, so at least we got one. Obviously, that doesn't mean anything, but the podium was George, Max, and Kimi. I picked Oscar, Lando, Max. Emily had Oscar, Lando, Charles, and you had Oscar, Max, Charles. And Charles was, the Ferrari just wasn't relevant in the grand scheme of the
He
day,
was he
even
was
though
he was there. He was there. Yes, we thank
he
him for
was
playing.
there. Yeah, he was there. He finished P5. That's 10 very valuable points for his drivers championship hopes and for Ferrari's constructor hopes, but the Ferraris were basically irrelevant other than snarking about strategy and being mad at their tires, or being mad at their team
Yes.
for picking the tires
Yes.
when they did and when all of those things
Yes.
happened.
Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it Charles who said, "Why did I box?" And
Yeah,
he said and his race engineer said, "Well, we're on Plan B." He says, "I thought we were talking about Plan C."
yeah,
So
and then I guess the clarification was Brian, his race engineer, said, "No, I was telling you that I acknowledged understanding when you said that your tires were good." So clearly, the same issues that Lewis is having with Ricky, his race engineer, who was Carlos's, are not just an issue on Lewis's side of the garage, and are just how things go in Ferrari in general with these race engineers. There also have been some interesting rumors that are probably pretty unfounded about Charles wanting to leave Ferrari, which it's just like, where would he go that would be a better opportunity, especially since his contract is locked up until Kingdom Come with half the grid. So I just think that it's really interesting that that wasn't just a communication issue that Lewis has been having, but Charles is having them too. And I mean, Charles is always having them, but it's standing out more now.
Exactly, and I really think that there were certainly some driver slash pit wall frustrations for many of the teams, because the drivers were definitely not on the same page as their pit wall. And even Crofty was saying, well, and said this to James Vowles. He said, you guys have more information than the driver does, but the driver still wants to be in charge.
Yeah.
And and while James said we were late in boxing our drivers, that's communication that now you're 10 races in. We're more than a third of the way through the season. And you gotta get it right. You gotta get onto a page. It doesn't have to be the page, it has to be a page.
Yes, I mean, preferably it would be the same one.
Or at least the same book.
What one would hope. And then, like we said, Williams managed to salvage a terrible weekend because Carlos was the P10 finisher. So they came out away with a point. They're still in no man's land constructors wise. So they've got a little bit of a buffer, especially because they've got 56 points right now, and P6 is 28 points. So they've got a good buffer behind them, but still you want to see Williams pulling out more points. I had Yuki. Emily had Lance, throwing him a bone, and there has been a lot of interesting speculation this week about Lance Stroll and how he was behaving in the media this week, and just like generally just didn't feel like he wanted to be there, and it might have just been like recovering from the procedure from his his wrist surgery, or maybe he wants to retire from Formula One and become a tennis pro. We don't know, but it was. This was not the weekend Lance wanted, and I don't think this was the weekend that anybody in the Stroll family wanted for him.
Yeah, it was not a good performance, but good on Carlos for getting to P10. That's good, a good point for Williams.
Yeah, and then you had Fernando, but Fernando finished better. So
Fernando was better. I'll take Fernando as better. I'll take the hit on that. That I don't mind.
Yeah. So then, biggest surprise, I had a double points weekend for VCarb. That definitely did not happen. Though I will say that Isaac Hadjar, who was a back marker at this point, I think he did Kimi Antonelli a little bit of a solid by taking just the appropriate amount of time before getting out of Oscar's way, giving Kimi a little bit more breathing room. And I really do think that those moments of traffic really did help Kimi maintain his podium position. So I think that, yes, Kimi owes Lando a fruit basket, but maybe like a gift card to Isaac.
I agree with you. I think that the back marker movement, it was about 15 laps to go, was a very crucial part of this race. And had there been a safety car at that point in time, it would have changed the race significantly, because they would have moved all of the back markers around to be unlapped.
Right,
and
exactly.
They would not have had the traffic that they would have had to run through.
Yeah. So then your biggest surprise was Yuki back in the points. Didn't happen. Oops. And then who's going to do a dumb? I said that the Alpine disaster was going to continue, and they didn't do anything. So I'm going to give myself credit for that. And you said that you were going to go with Ferrari, and Lewis did hit a groundhog. So you get partial credit.
I'll take partial credit. That was a good one. So
yes.
So let's move on, and talk about the 3 races for the Formula One Academy.
Yeah, F1 Academy honestly had a huge weekend this weekend. They kicked off. First of all, we when we recorded on Wednesday, they waited until Thursday to announce the wild card driver. Hold on, let me pull that up so we could at the very least acknowledge her. The Canadian Grand Prix wild card driver for F1 Academy was a 16-year-old from Germany, Matilda Patz, who was driving in a custom branded Gatorade car and Gatorade race suit as part of the new partnership with Gatorade. And honestly, this car looks really freaking cool.
Yeah, it does look cool.
We did also get the announcement that F1 Academy will be racing in Montreal through 2028. So we're going to be here for a while. This was a new circuit. Now it's going to be a circuit that everyone's going to have the opportunity to learn. But I think the fact that it was a new circuit was what led to the amount of chaos we had in specifically starting with the first race. Dorian Pon, who is the Mercedes driver, she ended up coming back to win, followed by McLaren driver Ella Lloyd in P2. But it's P3 where things got interesting. And originally, the finisher was Emma Felbermeyer, who drives for Stake, Sauber, whatever the heck you call them this week. But her car was disqualified for being found underweight post race because they do the same scrutineering at all levels, not just of Formula One. So Nina Gaidman, who is mine and Emily's favorite F1 Academy driver since she made the appearance as the Zandvoort wildcard last year, she was promoted to her first podium finish of her F1 Academy career with Felbermeyer's disqualification. Unfortunate for Felbermeyer, great for Gaidman. But Felbermeyer redeemed herself by coming back to win race 2, followed by Ella Lloyd and also Nina Gaidman, who now finished P3 for real this time. This race 2, because there were 3 races, this was the race that was awarded the sprint race points. So there were fewer points compared to races 1 and 3.
Correct.
But still very exciting. And then race 3, we had Chloe Chambers, who drives for Red Bull Ford. Ella Lloyd, again, she did the P2 sweep, and Dorian Pon in Mercedes.
Yes, and this has caused a significant change in the drivers' points.
Yeah, so notably, one of the names that I did not call out for those 9 podium places was former championship leader Maya Vug, who really... I'm going to admit, because I'm busy preparing to run a summer camp, that I did not have the chance to watch the F1 Academy races this weekend. I will get to it eventually. But this was just not Vug's weekend, which is really unfortunate for her. She has now moved down to P3 in the championship. She only brought in 8 points. And Dorian Pon was the points winner of the weekend. She ended up adding 46 points to her total, so she's now leading the championship charge with 109. She's the only one above 100 right now, followed by Chloe Chambers, who added 34 points, including her first place finish in race 3. So she's back 20 points behind Pon for P2 in the championship, but it's game on. Vug is in third. Ella Lloyd, who came out with the second most points of the weekend with 44, shot up from being, I don't even know if she was in the top 10. That's how closely I was paying attention. I don't think she was, but she is now P4 in the championship, pushing Alicia Pomalski, who is the Red Bull Academy driver, down to P5 with 53 points.
Right. It's gotten very exciting very fast.
Yeah, and I honestly didn't think we were gonna, I knew that I had a feeling going into the weekend that Dorian Pon was going to overtake Vug in the championship lead, but I didn't think that Vug was going to slip all the way back to P3. I really thought that is going to be more of a dogfight between them, and then really didn't see Ella Lloyd coming at all. She's really shot up as the McLaren representative on the grid this year. And, 3 consecutive P2 finishes is phenomenal for such a young driver, who I believe she's one of the drivers who this is her first year doing single-seater.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily count out Vug, especially with 6 races to go in 3 locations, ending in Las Vegas. In November. I think that there's still ample opportunity for Vug to actually move back up and be competitive.
Yeah, I mean, there's still time. She's such a like feisty type of driver that she like there's no way she won't bounce back from this weekend. It just I didn't expect to not see her at on the podium because she had a significant podium streak too going throughout this season. So it'll be really interesting to see what we're going to see out of F1 Academy when they come back next. Where are they going next? We are going to see them again in Zandvoort. So that will be Nina Gademan's home race. We will see if she can, bring back a little bit of that magic. Obviously, Gateman is improving a lot. I want to see more of her. I want to see her have more podiums, and it'll be interesting to see how drivers like Vug bounce back. Pomalski, we really didn't see a lot of her out of the weekend. See if what she's going to be able to do, what the other Red Bull driver, Rafael Ferreira, is going to be able to do. So there are a lot of questions going into this, but right now I do think that we're going to see a pretty significant dogfight between Dorian Pon and Chloe Chambers.
I agree. It's getting very exciting, which is really wonderful to see. It was also great to see Susie Wolf being interviewed before the race, talking about the Academy and everything that it has brought to Formula One racing, and really saying that this is not just a man's sport anymore.
Right.
And, it is, the goal of the F1 Academy is to get a driver on the grid, a female driver on the grid in Formula One.
Right. Period. And we will see that at some point eventually, but even more important of what the F1 Academy drivers are doing now is the gender equity they're working toward in karting. And the more we get gender equity in karting, the more likely it is that we're going to see these standout female drivers get through into, out of F1 Academy and then into the further feeder series like F3 and like F2 to get them into F1.
Exactly. I agree with you. I agree.
So, final thoughts. Canada was interesting. Late race theatrics made it exciting, but definitely didn't top Canada from last year.
Oh, absolutely agree. And if memory serves, this is the first time in 8 races this season that McLaren has not been on the podium.
Yeah, this also did end Oscar Piastri's podium streak because he was like one podium off of breaking Lewis Hamilton's record of podiums for McLaren. So unfortunately, but I think we're going to see Oscar end up back on the podium pretty soon. And before we end the podcast, I wanted to add a not Emily's off-track moment because Emily has obviously been busy with her brother's wedding this weekend. But at the very beginning of the race during the formation lap, they cut to the hairpin at turn 10, which showed those graphics of the F1 movie trailer. The world premiere is tomorrow night. Crofty and Martin Brundle will both be there. But I remember seeing it on the formation lap and then seeing it again the next time they put the camera on turn 10. I said to you, are they going to show clips of the F1 movie trailer every time they cut to turn 10 during this race? And the answer was for like half
pretty
of
much.
It, yes.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It was pretty much there the entire time.
Yeah, which, like, I get it, but it's like, once was pretty cool. Maybe if they didn't do it every time they had cut to turn 10, and maybe they, like every 3 times you cut to turn 10, you can show us the little VR way that they superimposed the movie trailer onto the TV graphics. Like, that would have been better than, like, every single time for 2/3 of the race, and then all of a sudden they forgot about it.
Yeah, well, if you pay for the advertising, you got to have the placement.
Obviously, and of course, the F1 movie trailer is the biggest thing, or the movie itself is the biggest thing since sliced bread in Formula One. And I do say I almost had an opportunity to go to an early screening of it, but because I'm about to start running a summer camp, I could not go, which is very unfortunate, but I will see it as soon as I have an available day off. I will go to the movies.
There we go.
Yeah.
You heard it here
and
first.
Then, before we get into up next, I am looking at the FIA documentation, and they have not said anything yet about the Red Bull protest. If they do, we might have a little bit of a cameo from editing Catherine later. But as of this point, nothing has happened between George and Mercedes and Red Bull and Max, and there have been no changes to the final standings. The classification is still provisional. They haven't released the final yet, so they're still deliberating, I guess. And they also had like a ton of cars that they needed to that they were going to summon following the race for safety car infringements. So the FIA will be working late into the night, but if there is an update, we will let you know.
Well, watch your going.off.track Instagram page for more information.
Yes, that too. So, coming up next, we will have a week off and then we will go to Austria. Emily and I do have some plans for some F101 episodes coming eventually once we have a little bit more free time. And until then, we will see you in Austria. Happy Father's Day, Paul. Thank you for being press ganged into being my co-host for the weekend. I know your Father's Day schedule was very busy otherwise, since your children are A, not in the state, or B, running a summer camp. But thank you again.
My pleasure, and thanks for going off track with us.